here's Brody Brazil.
Hey, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to Nashville, Tennessee, and welcome to what's probably going to be my final video from Winter Meetings 2023 here at the Opryland Resort. I say probably because, I don't know, maybe some more news breaks or develops and I can address it quickly in reaction, but we're entering the final hours officially of when all the media and most of the teams are here for Winter Meetings, and so by the time you're watching this, I'll probably be already on my way home. I wanted to kind of go through a quick cross-section of things that stood out to me during my time in coverage here for NBC Sports. And by the way, you can see the full details of all of these stories and interviews at NBCSportsCalifornia.com. Quick plug there on the coverage. But these are little bits and pieces, starting off with actually my first interview of being out here in Tennessee. Boy, it feels like I just landed. It feels like it was just Sunday night. And by the time you're watching this, it's already Wednesday. But I spoke to Mark Kotsay first thing Monday morning. And actually, one of the big things of this offseason for him, in addition to everything else that's gone on with the A's as a franchise and the uncertainty there, he actually interviewed for the Mets managerial job about a month ago. Now, it took a couple days to go through that process. They went a different way. And then a couple days after that, Kotsay had his club option picked up by the A's for 2025. Here's what Mark told me about the Mets interview process. We heard your name mentioned in the month of November on a couple different other teams' fronts. Obviously, the Mets situation seemed like it got a bit farther. Now that it's history, what can you tell us about that process that you were a part of?
Yeah, well, I can tell you that I did go through the process. I was engaged. The A's gave me permission to go through the interview process, albeit it was a short one because, I've been happy here. I'm an Oakland Athletic through and through. I want to see this thing forward. At the time, this organization with what we're going through and the uncertainty in the future, to entertain that opportunity to go to New York, to go to that market, for my family, for the stability, I chose to go through that process, but landed back here where I belong and where I'm looking forward to, building something with this group for a long time. And
you owe it to yourself. I think that's what you're saying, to go through that process, because it's kind of an experience that you can maybe value at some point down the road. You've now been through another interview process.
Well, not only value, but learn from.
Yes.
And I think that was great. David Stearns taking over the Mets, the conversations we had, I learned from those conversations, right. And I can pull and implement things that I feel, are valuable. And so, it was nice to be engaged in that process. As managers, we're only usually evaluated on our wins and losses, and so from an industry perspective, it did feel good to be a part of that. It doesn't feel good to sit here after a 50-win season as a manager and a losing manager for 2 years. So definitely motivated to get to spring training and to continue building on what we did the last 2 months of the season.
Okay, one of the other angles I kind of pinpointed going into these winter meetings was for the A's and the difficulty I thought they might be having signing multiple-year free agent contracts, right? They know where they're going to be for 2024, but there's a lot of questions surrounding 2025. And a team at this moment that does not have a single player with contract in hand. They also, as a team, don't know where their home venue is going to be for 2025. I mentioned they do have Kotsay under contract for that season, but Jon Morosi of MLB Network, I've been following his coverage for a long time, both baseball and hockey. We are the two guys that have similar worlds. I love his work and I trust what he had to say. He told me a little perspective about, the actual difficulty that the A's are having. How can they actually sign free agents right now in any multi-year capacity when they don't even know where they'll be playing games in 2025? They also don't know their payroll situation. They don't know if they're going to have to pay for a stadium in Las Vegas or not. How do you see it from just the free agent side of things? Are they handcuffed a little bit?
It's complicated, Brody. There's no question about that. That the A's now have a number of structural disadvantages. To begin with, the payroll overall, as we know, has never been especially high in recent years to begin with, but you add on that complexity of the multi-year question, it's real. And what we do know certainly is they will be playing somewhere in the western part of the United States in 2025. So that part, at least if you are a West Coast person, if your home is in Arizona, you at least have spring training at home. There are some elements that exist that give you a little higher degree of confidence. Of course, the Blue Jays went through, because of the pandemic, not knowing where they were going to play. Right. It's real. And especially if you're a player with a family, these are real considerations. I think ultimately you have to give them one or two things, either certainty about role and living situation, which obviously the A's really can't do. So if you can't do that, you have to then probably boost a little bit on the financial piece of things to be able to win a multi-year deal. That's going to be a very difficult task for David Forst and company.
You've known a lot of players over a lot of years, and I think what you're saying is it almost would be discouraging to not have all the answers that they'd be looking for and the securities. How about if the A's ultimately settled on a split season situation, if they played half their games in the Bay Area, half their games somewhere else? Is that something that players would be agreeable to, they would be acceptable to, or they wouldn't like? How would you see that?
It's a great question, and certainly from a standpoint of the Players Union and weighing in on things, that was a big question about the situation that had been put forward between the Rays and the notion of splitting between Tampa and Montreal, which of course did not happen because of MLB owners not agreeing to it. But the question of would players accept that? In some cases, perhaps they would. I would never want to speak for the players and for the union on that point.
It's not optimal, though.
But it is not optimal. You go back and you think about the way things played out with the Montreal Expos years ago, with San Juan and Montreal before they eventually moved to Washington, D.C. All these situations I'm mentioning here were suboptimal to begin with. The Toronto situation was predicated on the pandemic. So there are a lot of extenuating circumstances, and I would point out that none of them ultimately became long-term enduring solutions. And that to me is the very instructive point to say the A's in finding a way to work forward with this with the union. There's just a lot of obstacles to a split city scenario.
People in Northern California are a bit devastated on the news and the sequence of events, and they also understand a shovel hasn't been placed in dirt yet in Las Vegas. Remains to be seen. What's the national perspective on how this has all played out? Do people understand the Oakland perspective? Do they understand what the fans are going through? Or do they just look at it as something that's happening 1,000 or 2 miles away?
Well, there has to be empathy, Brody, and that to me is where I'd begin on this. I think everybody who loves sports, we all have a team. We all have a team or teams that you fell in love with when you were young or came to later on in life. And we all understand what it means to have a team and then to lose a team. I could speak for someone who grew up in a state where we have not, to this point in time, lost professional sports teams in Michigan. But it's devastating, and I understand that. And certainly the fans of Oakland know that, sadly, better than any other market in our country of what that feels like. So that, to me, is where my thoughts, first of all, go, is to the empathy and what Oakland fans are going through and sadly continue to go through. And it's, I think the other point I'd make to the large point here, I do not have intimate knowledge of every step in the process over the last 20 years, whether it was Fremont, whether it's Fremont or San Jose, of any other place that where parts were at one point in time looking very promising, and then it ultimately never came to be. What I would say is this: it is impossible to look upon nearly 2 decades, if you go from Fremont to now, if the Fremont proposal to now, of trying and ultimately not working out. This cannot be the fault of any one person or one entity or one government. There is blame to be shared. And that's really, from an outsider's perspective, I know certainly the general contours of the story, but I think it is for anybody to say, well, this is the fault of this one person, is, I just think, disingenuous and not accurate of the full picture of things. Certainly could, if this had happened, would there be a different outcome? Perhaps. But there are so many different if-then statements over 20 years that I think, Brody, we must first acknowledge the inherent complexity of how we have arrived at this moment.
Another trusted national media member is Matt Vasgersian of MLB Network. And I say part of the national media, but he also understands the A's situation very much from a local angle. A graduate of Camp Alindo High School. I believe he was born in Berkeley, spent a lot of time in his earliest years growing up in the East Bay. And so I wanted to pick his brain as somebody who's around a lot of different baseball teams and players and personalities, but somebody with a deep-rooted connection to Oakland and to the A's to get his perspective on how the national side of things are seeing this A's potential relocation to Las Vegas. What's the national perspective on what's been approved by Major League Baseball that the A's can go to Las Vegas if they can make it work?
You know, the national perspective is that of questions for the short term, and people seem comfortable with this in the long term. Probably more comfortable than I am.
Yeah.
The fact that the Raiders have moved there and have filled the stadium, and that everybody loves Allegiant, the fact that the Golden Knights are really good early in their franchise history, I think it gives everybody the idea that Vegas is this fertile pro sports environment that's willing and able to host all four major sports in North America. I might be a little bit more skeptical as to endorse that thought, but I think nationally people feel like Vegas is an emerging market for sports and that baseball makes sense to them there. I still have my own questions, but apparently smarter people than I have answered those questions. And I'll even say this. I recently rewatched for the millionth time Ken Burns' baseball documentary, and I was really struck at the passage in the film where he documents the Dodgers leaving Brooklyn and the pain in the community and how population bases were shifting, socioeconomic bases were shifting. And you could have taken out Brooklyn Dodgers and inserted Oakland A's, and the script would have made sense in a sad way for me as an Oakland A's fan. But I don't know, I almost went to bed that night feeling a little less aggravated about this situation than I had previously.
Yeah. You obviously have the national perspective, but I think you're speaking to the local understanding of what the community in Northern California, Oakland specifically, is going through. Do you think the national media that covers this, they're aware of the big picture details? You mentioned a lot of the questions and a lot of the intimate details. Do you think they really have a grasp on all of the small things that make a big difference in this deal?
No, I really don't.
They report on it, but I'm not sure they really are in the weeds.
I don't think they're in the weeds. I don't think the national media is that interested in being in the weeds in this story because it's a can that's been kicked down the road so many times.
Right.
There's a little bit of like, I'll believe it when I see it.
Or maybe also,
there.
Let's get this over with. And that doesn't mean the best thing and the right thing are the same thing. I mean, there is a rush to get to a resolution on this no matter what.
Right. No, I think that's accurate as well. But look, there have been discussions about the A's leaving Oakland cyclically every 4 or 5 years for my entire adult lifetime. In 78 and 79 when things were bleak, when Charlie Finley was looking for relief, thank goodness that the Haas family came along and made the A's the vanguard brand in the American League for the better part of a decade. We're not that far. That's what drives me nuts about the Oakland conversation. We're not that far away, time-wise, from Oakland being the center of the American League. From a business operations standpoint, as documented in the great book, Goodbye Oakland, written by Dave Newhouse and Andy Dolich, which I just finished, which is fantastic. It's such a great love letter to Oakland. It wasn't that long ago. I mean, maybe I'm an old guy. I am 56, and I'm processing it incorrectly. But it just doesn't feel like that long ago to me. Okay, as you know, with the lottery draft, the A's are selecting fourth in 2024. And this is 2 years in a row that they've basically got hosed. I mean, last year at this time, they had finished their season with the second worst record in baseball. They ended up getting the 6th overall pick, which is not bad for most, but it's just not supposed to work out that way. This past season, they had the worst record in all of baseball. And somehow, some way, they're going to pick fourth, behind teams like the Guardians, who were chasing the playoffs, behind the Reds, who had a winning record this year. Yeah, the Rockies are in there too, ahead of the Oakland A's, but the A's and Rockies, there was a total of 3 teams that had about an 18% chance of picking first. The A's are picking fourth. And, oh yeah, by the way, it's not just that they're getting shorted there. The A's also, because of the latest CBA, collective bargaining agreement, because they're a revenue-sharing team, and they'll be on it for 3 straight years, including next year, they're not even eligible for a lottery pick next season. As David Forst told me, they can't, I believe, pick higher than 10th
next season because they're on revenue sharing and you can't be on it 3 straight years and dip into the lottery. So here's David Forst's reaction about getting that 4th overall pick this year. Your initial reaction is what?
Well, I appreciate you wanted to catch my emotions raw, so we waited till right after to do this. It's not much to say other than it kind of stinks.
Right.
You don't go into a season hoping to get the number 1 pick out of it. When you do have a year like we did, you hope that at least the sort of consolation is that you pick at the top of the draft. That's not going to happen.
And it's an interesting process that was set forth in the new CBA, so we're 2 years into this, but we're also here in a year now where the Cleveland Guardians, who chase the playoffs, have the number 1 overall pick. So I guess my point is it even difficult for somebody like yourself to understand? And if it is, how are fans supposed to understand how this goes?
Yeah, look, it's all laid out. You see the odds. Right. Aside from that, the Reds had a winning record, and they end up with the second.
That's right.
The second pick.
That's right.
Look, we know the parameters when you go into it. We knew how the CBA was laid out. Obviously, MLB put this into play because that's the system they wanted to have designed. So we'll abide by it.
There's no shenanigans. It's just not a lot of fun.
Right? Exactly. Okay. I'm not a conspiracy guy, so I'm not gonna go deeper into it.
I might be. What do we know about this draft class? And to be honest, what is the difference between a 1 pick, a 2 pick, a 3 pick, and a 4 pick?
Yeah, I think we're still 6 months out from really knowing this class super well.
They've got a whole season to play.
Right, and our guys will spend all spring watching them. I think at this time last year, we didn't realize the gap that was going to be between 5 and 6 necessarily. So I think we know there are always good players out there. It's a college position player heavy draft. I think we all know that Wake Forest has an outstanding draft class specifically, and that's something we're going to focus on. Outside of that, things will change over the course of the spring.
Okay, this next little clip features 2 people I absolutely love. And that's the crazy part about winter meetings. You never even really know who you're going to run into. The width and the depth of all the different people that show up, it's absolutely insane. Case in point, you're about to hear Chad Pinder talking about Stephen Vogt. And the reason I knew Chad was even here is because my first night in, I ran into Jed Lowry, who told me Chad was going to be here. And so I text Chad, hope to see you. Next morning, I literally run right into him before we even coordinated. So we start talking about a bunch of different things. I say, hey, I'm doing a little piece on Stephen Vogt. Would you just help, give me an interview, explain how you feel about him taking on this new job with Cleveland? By the way, the Guardians, they did get the number 1 overall pick in the draft lottery. So Cleveland's getting everything right now. But I talked to Chad about Stephen and about how everybody kind of knew that Voter was always going to be a big league manager at some point. I don't think any of us knew it would happen this quick. Do you think in his final years as a player, he was obviously preparing for something like this? Could you ever see him maybe just mentally taking a team in, a game in, almost as if he was already going that direction?
I know he was from conversations, whether it be after games late at night or just conversations in a clubhouse. And it's funny, I'll share this with you. I can remember 2022, we were in Cleveland. We had really been scuffling like much of the season, unfortunately. But it was the first time Voter kind of had one of those heart-to-heart moments where he brought the whole team together, and he sat in the middle of everybody and kind of gave the, no matter what happens this season, it doesn't look like we're going to the playoffs, but if I can encourage you to do one thing, let's just play for each other and let's try to get a little bit better each and every day. And I texted him and I was like, look, you probably don't remember this, but it's a little ironic that you're managing in Cleveland when you gave your first manager speech in Cleveland. So, Voter has, great things ahead of him and couldn't happen to a better guy.
Okay, and last but definitely not least is the man himself, Stephen Vogt. And what an interesting offseason it was for him. First getting the interview with the San Francisco Giants, which I thought was, a pretty good candidate for them. Probably one of the leaders that they were going to lean on until Bob Melvin became available, and how interesting that is, right? Bob Melvin, Stephen Vogt, 2 guys who know each other, respect the hell out of each other, and then all of a sudden their names are up for the same job. Anyway, had a little fun with Stephen at the end of our conversation, obviously talking about his job, his new role in Cleveland first, but also how the whole San Francisco thing actually went down from his perspective. And this is super awkward because He's right there. Yeah. You see him, right? Bomo?
Yeah, Bomo.
Yeah. So how did that go in terms of this offseason, right? He was in on the Giants. You did a Giants interview. You both end up with great jobs. But, I mean, you're almost rooting for each other, but you're out there in the same pool swimming together now, you know?
Yeah, I think it's really weird for me because I've looked up to Bob so much and continue to. That's never going to change. And he's been such a huge influence on me and my career. And there's going to be a lot of managerial styles I have that mimic his. And you know, when our names were mentioned for the same job, it was really, really weird and surreal for me. And, you know, and then, you know, it's like as soon as Bob's name came out for the Giants, I'm like, well, oh, that was fun. But, you know, he's obviously such a special person to me. He's going to absolutely crush it with the Giants, except against the Guardians. And I can't wait for that.
No good interleague battles. Okay, last thing here. Is it too late for me to talk you back into doing the TV thing? Is this officially the point of no return?
I think I signed my contract yesterday. So, yeah, we are officially not going media route.
Okay, that does it from Winter Meetings here in Nashville. Actually, I take it back. There's one more thing, and I don't know when you're actually going to see it here on YouTube. I'll hope to bring you some coverage of it in the very near future, but we are due to take a tour of what is likely to be the stadium site, the future potential stadium site, of the Nashville Stars. Who are the Stars, you ask? It's the expansion team and the project that my good buddy Dave Stewart has been working on now for years. And we're finally here in Nashville together at the same time, going to go over the site, look at it from a potential angle, get his story on what he's been working on, what still remains, and kind of, you know, really set the scene of optimism that, yeah, friend of the program, Dave Stewart, might be a Major League Baseball owner. How cool would that be to get that real good representation in Major League Baseball? I certainly hope it for Stu, and quite honestly, I hope it for this town of Nashville. Can't even say it. It's been such a good host to us, and look forward to my next trip back. Until then, hey, thumbs up. You made it here to the end of the video. If you could do that down below, that would greatly help me and the channel out. Also, don't forget to subscribe so I can definitely see you back here next time.